Everyone. My name is Ashley Seals. I serve as the director of the State Housing Trust Fund Commission for the Homeless. And I want to welcome you to the Georgia Rehouse pre-application workshop for funding cycle 2. Again, as I stated, my name is Ashley Seals and I will be your presenter today. The mission of the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Commission is to support communities that provide housing and services for individuals and families striving to end their state of homelessness. And then I do want to kind of go over the 3 functions of the State Housing Trust Fund for those of you who may be on the call and are not aware of those functions within the State Housing Trust Fund. The first one being the State Housing Trust Fund administration. So that is essentially the administration of the State Housing Trust Fund. The second being the State Housing Trust Fund initiatives and programs, and that will include our Stable Housing Accountability Program, our Special Voucher Assistance Fund, Georgia Rehouse, which you guys are on the call today to learn more about, and others that are going to be launched later this year. And then the last being our collaborative partnership for our federal programs to include our Balance of State Continuum of Care, our statewide HMIS administration, and then our Emergency Solutions Grant. So what we'll be discussing or going over today is what is Georgia Rehouse, overview of the Georgia Rehouse process, overview of the Georgia Rehouse pre-application, funding priorities and categories, the eligibility requirements, the pre-application procedure, and then we'll open it up for any questions. So what is Georgia Rehouse? Georgia Rehouse supports local efforts to reduce or end homelessness in communities. This is a single streamlined application process to reduce application requirements for local partners, and it includes notices of funding from several funding sources with their own funding priorities and guidelines. I do want to make note here that if your organization did apply in the previous pre-application process, you do not have to resubmit a pre-application unless the project has changed substantially from when you first did your pre-application with us. So just an overview of the entire Georgia Rehouse process. So currently we're in the pre-application process. So what this looks like is that an organization will submit a pre-application. That pre-application will be reviewed by the State Housing Trust Fund and feedback will be provided on whether your organization should apply in the current round of funding or whether it should wait for future rounds of funding, and then give recommendations on how to strengthen the application when you do apply in a competitive round. And then the next step is that the competitive application process, and that will include the completing the competitive application and then competitive application scoring and site visits that are conducted by the State Housing Trust Fund. And then the last step in the Georgia Rehouse process is awards. So your first step is going to be submitting your pre-application, and then once your pre-application has been submitted, we'll review it and give you feedback on that and tell you which round of funding may be more will be right for your organization, and then you would go into the competitive application process, and then awards will happen after scoring and site visits have occurred. So now we'll get into the overview of the Georgia Rehouse pre-application. So what the pre-application does is determine basic eligibility. It assesses the project's readiness, and it helps DCA determine timing and maximum awards amount for each funding round. It also creates a streamlined process for our community partners. So the funding priorities under Georgia Rehoused are as follows. That is permanent housing opportunities, and that is going to be the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Reserve dollars for up to about $5.9 million. The second is going to be small scale rental housing developments, and that's going to be under Home ARP, and it will focus on small scale developments or rehabs, and federal requirements will apply, and there is up to $4 million under this funding priority. The next is going to be non-congregate shelter or transitional housing opportunities. And this funding opportunity comes from the amended fiscal year 26 State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless appropriation. And there is up to $27.4 million available under this funding priority. The fourth one is going to be supportive services, acute homeless response capital, and residential housing capital opportunities. And this is going to be under the funding priority of the Georgia Rehouse Veteran Services, and that is going to be up to $5 million available. And then the last being the homeless services to include 2-year shelter operations and encampment removal and relocation costs. And this funding priority comes comes from the amended fiscal year state housing trust fund for the homeless appropriation, and there is up to about $7.8 million available under this funding opportunity. We'll now go over the funding categories under Georgia Rehoused. So those funding categories will look like this. So if you are willing to accept state housing trust fund dollars, which are state dollars, you must comply with the state housing trust fund program rules, the Georgia Environmental Protection Act's requirement, the Georgia Public Works Construction Act's requirement, and meet the State Housing Trust Fund grant reporting and monitoring requirements. If you are willing to accept federal, which is going to be those home op dollars, you must comply with all applicable federal regulations, including but not limited to the National Environmental Protection Act requirements, federal reporting and monitoring requirements, Davis Beacon requirements if the unit count is 12 or more, federal procurement standards, and then the Home American Rescue Plan requirements, including qualified population eligibility. And then you must demonstrate the capacity to maintain and manage those federal funds and compliance. And if you're willing to accept both federal and state funds, you must meet all of the requirements listed above for both of those funding sources. Next, we're going to get into the eligibility requirements under Georgia Rehouse. So the applicants must meet the following eligibility requirements for the pre-application, and they are as followed. There is going to be a collaborative partnership requirement, and so applicants must be able to demonstrate that they have a collaborative partnership representing local government interests and decisions. And what that looks like is strong local partnerships demonstrate shared ownership, align resources and decision making, and increase the likelihood that the project will be successfully implemented and sustained over time. So what we want to see here is that there is local government backing on the projects that are being submitted, and that the local government is involved and has essentially a stake in the project, skin in the game, whether if you want to look at it that way, so that the local government is invested in this project, just as the organization who may be handling this project is. The second is going to be your unsheltered homeless impact, and that is going to be the applicant must be able to show how these funds will provide a reduction in the unsheltered homeless population in their community. And then the third is going to be HMIS, and the applicant must show that they are either a current HMIS user or they are willing to get on the HMIS system and have started engaging with their local COC to start the process of getting onto the HMIS system if awarded. And so just a little bit more on the collaborative partnership under the eligibility requirements. So what that's going to look like, again, is that there are local government interests and decisions, and they must demonstrate a material partnership, including shared risks, shared responsibilities, and financial investment from all parties, whether provided in cash or in kind. And partnerships should clearly articulate how each partner contributes resources, expertise, and decision-making authority toward the success of the proposed partnerships. And the collaborative partnership must include a local government entity. In addition, a development authority may participate but cannot replace a local government applicant, and applicants must demonstrate an active documented partnership. Applicants must provide a development agreement or letter of intent outlining the process by which they will select development partners. And under this collaborative partnership as well, there must be a documented MOU in place at time of the application. But during the pre-application process, there can either be a documented MOU in place with the local government, or there has been an advisory board set up, and that advisory board is working towards a collaborative partnership MOU. Next, we'll move into a little bit more about the unsheltered homeless population. So an applicant should include most recent unsheltered homeless numbers from the point time count data. Applicants who believe the most recent available point in time count data is not reflective of unsheltered homelessness in their community can submit a narrative with other data sources outlining the community's unsheltered homelessness. And then applicants should include the minimum number of homeless individuals to be rehoused or sheltered through the project for which the funding is being requested. A brief narrative explanation of how the anticipated outcome number was developed must also be included.
I'm sorry. Okay. Yes, thank you.
And then lastly, on the HMIS requirement, applicants must currently use or demonstrate steps taken to use ClientTrack, which is the designated Georgia HMIS system. Agencies who are currently using ClientTrack should provide documentation of their view and edit status in the system. And agencies that are not currently using ClientTrack should demonstrate engagement with their local COC to obtain access to ClientTrack for reporting homeless service projects. This can include emails, written letters of support, or other documentation of the ClientTrack enrollment process. And to begin that process with your local COC, applicants should submit a request to the local COC. And if you're unsure which COC serves your area, you can contact GA HMIS support at dca.ga.gov. If awarded, all projects will be expected to utilize ClientTrack for program reporting. Now we'll get into the project proposal and plan that should be submitted with your pre-application. So in addition to meeting these eligibility requirements, you also must submit a project plan, project proposal and plan. And what that will look like is that all proposals must include the population that is going to be served, and this should include the minimum number of homeless individuals to be rehoused or sheltered through the project, and a brief narrative explanation on how that anticipated outcome number was developed. It should also include your service delivery and program duration. So we need a detailed description on how services will be provided to the unsheltered homeless population, and then provide an explanation of how requested funding will reduce unsheltered homelessness in the community, and whether the request is for a new or existing activity. Also on that, you also, for communities that are managing multiple fund sources, you may ask for reimbursement from state funds to cover encampment renewal or shelter operations costs for activities that occur in 2026 before application or award. And applicants must demonstrate how reimbursement would allow the applicants to repurpose more restrictive funding sources to make a more significant impact on ending unsheltered homelessness in their community. In your proposal, you also need to include some information on community engagement. And what that looks like is a brief summary of communities involvement in proposal development and or plans to involve resident stakeholders. And then we also need budget and financial documentation. You must submit a complete and comprehensive budget and internal operations budget that ensures long-term operational viability of the project or demonstrates support until the unsheltered homelessness reduction is met. It must be submitted in Excel format, and the budget does not count towards the 6-page limit for your project proposal and plan. In addition, in your project proposal, you must indicate your funding type, and you should indicate whether you are requesting federal, state, or both. If willing to accept state and federal funds, you must demonstrate the ability to manage both funding streams, including clear cost allocations and compliance with the most restrictive applicable rules. This is going to be specific to capital funding, these next few slides on what should be included in your project proposal and plan. So for your capital only, if requesting capital funding, applicants should also submit a brief project plan, no more than 6 pages, that address the following: project location, development type, your development timeline, and other details applicant determines as relevant for your capital project. For your project location, you must include and identify a site and provide initial site assessments to include plans for acquisition and site development, such as zoning requirements, utility and transportation information, environmental considerations, and others. And you should anticipate a site visit. We will notify you of those site visits prior to conducting those site visits, but please be aware that a site visit could happen. In addition, you need to tell us what the development type is going to be, whether it will be residential, whether it will be a shelter, transitional housing, or manufactured housing may be included in residential or transitional housing. And then your development timeline should be included as well. When developing that development timeline, we want you to consider the following activities from application to in-service. So environmental reviews, your local municipality approvals and permits, your site preparation, the site and utility assessments, the bidding and procurement of all contractors and consultants, your geotechnical report, and that's going to be for new constructions only, your owner agreements with an architect and general contract, your schedule of values determination, your accessibility requirements, your construction schedule, your design, development, and changes, your certificate of completion, your final inspection, your furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, and post-development and preparing for in-service activities, and others that are not articulated above, but the applicant deems is relevant to the project. Please note that not all of these activities may be paid by the requested funding, but we do need a detailed development timeline of kind of from application to in-service. So what all of this is going to look like, the time is going to take for the environmental reviews to happen, what the timeline is going to look like for your site preparation. So things like that when you are developing your development timeline. So the next thing we'll kind of go over is kind of your key characteristics of a strong application. And we will kind of go through these based upon kind of our overall, what we think a strong application will look like once it is submitted to us. So first, we're going to kind of focus in on our local government and community commitment. So we want to see participation from local government. So evidence that a collaborative partnership has a shared interest in the project's success. And what that will look like as far as evidence is that MOU or an advisory board working towards an MOU for time of application. And then we need to see local government investment, which may include financial contributions, waiver of permit or development fees, donated land, facilities or services, or other documented commitments from your local government. And then we also want to see community partnerships that demonstrate shared interest in the project as well. So how community partners would help with the proposed project, whether they are going to be providing services, whether they will be providing financial contributions or other documented commitments with your community partners who are interested and you all have a shared interest in the project. And then the other characteristics we'll kind of go through now are your demonstrated impact, the data-driven planning, and then the long-term strategy. For your demonstrated impact, we need a clear explanation of how the project will reduce homelessness in your community, and then measurable outcomes that align with that proposed data that you provide us. And then a clear anticipated community impact. How will this project impact your community, and then alignment with identified local homelessness needs. So based upon the local homelessness needs in your area, how does this project align with that need? For data-driven planning, we need showing that there is a local data that supports the need for this project, and information that identifies service gaps in your community, and data demonstrating why the project approach is appropriate for the community. And then for your long-term strategy, we want information that supports the broader regional homeless response strategy in your community, and evidence that the strategy is to keep individuals housed outside of continuous subsidies. So whether that is, we need to see evidence of a plan in place and what that plan will look like for your community. And then lastly, a plan for sustainability beyond initial funding. So how will you sustain this project beyond the initial funding of this project? We need to see clear evidence on on how that will look and what the sustainability will be. And then we need a complete and realistic budget. What we want to see in what we consider a strong application is a complete and realistic budget. So we need complete operational and development budget to include your overhead costs and clearly identifying the funding sources that will be used for this project and evidence that the project is financially feasible. And then we also need what we consider for a characteristic of a strong application is funding need and non-duplication. So does this project expand services, create a new capacity, or enhance local homelessness response system? And applications should clearly demonstrate that requested funding are not replacing or duplicating costs already supported through other public or private funding sources. So, will this funding expand what you already have going on in your community? Will it create a new capacity, or will it enhance your local homelessness response? Is what a characteristic of a strong application will look like when we are talking about funding need and non-duplication. I now want to move to what the pre-application procedure will look like, and then we'll open it up for questions for the group. So your pre-application procedure will be pre-applications will be submitted electronically. The link to the application is on the Georgia Rehoused webpage. There is a little icon to the right of the screen that says submit your pre-application. You can click on that and it will take you to the job form to complete your application. Pre-applications will close on July 29th at 5 p.m. And what you must upload in that pre-application is documentation of your local collaborative partnership. That's either that MOA or the advisory committee documentation. Evidence of local government participation as a primary or co-applicant. Documentation of your unsheltered homeless impact. The project proposal and plan. And remember, your project proposal and plan can only be 6 pages. The budget is not included in those 6 pages. The complete project budget. We need to see that in an Excel format, and we want it to be complete and comprehensive. And then the HMIS information, whether you're a current user or whether you're working towards getting access to the system. Pre-applications will be reviewed for completeness, eligibility, and readiness, and all pre-applications will receive a determination letter with recommendations to apply in an upcoming competitive round or defer to a future application cycle after addressing proposal considerations from the trust fund. If you have any questions during the pre-application process, we encourage you to submit an email to shtf@dca.ga.gov, and we will respond to those inquiries there. And just kind of give you a heads up on the competitive application round for funding cycle 2. The competitive applications will open July 22nd, 2026, and they will close on August 19th, 2026 at 5 p.m. There will be some minor changes and additional funding added to funding cycle 2 notices, but we do encourage you to use funding cycle 1 as kind of your guidepost as you're preparing for the competitive application for cycle 2. And if you have any questions during the competitive application process, please also email us at shtf@dca.ga.gov. I now want to open it up to the group for any questions that you may have. So if you have any questions, as stated, you can either put them in the chat or you can come off mute and ask your questions. Larry?
Good morning. My question is, do we have to choose which of the funding sources we are applying to, or will that be done for us? Do we just acknowledge that we're open to state and federal funds and the best source will be determined
Absolutely.
based on our project?
Yes, so you can let us know that you're open to state only, federal only, or state and federal. And as a part of the recommendation process, we will let you know what we recommend you applying for under your project.
Thank you.
Welcome. Larry, I see your hands up.
Yes, is there a document that details allowable cost, or are they generally anything that is, within the scope of providing services for homeless individuals?
If you want to, and what I would encourage you to do if you're looking into that as well, is to look at the funding notices from round one. They are on the DCA website, and under each funding notice, it tells you what allowable expenses are based upon each funding category. Steve?
Yes, good morning. I'm in Macon, and we did put in for the original cycle, and you said we do not have to do a pre-application for this round?
That is correct, unless the project is substantially changing from what you submitted in the previous pre-application. You do not need to submit an application for a pre-application for a funding cycle 2. You would go directly into submitting an application for the competitive round.
I guess, is there any advantage to doing another pre-app just to get further feedback from you all?
Steve, stand by. There's some information coming down from for first round applicants about funding cycle 2 for you all.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Pax, I see that you have you have a question in the chat. How much funding is still available for this second round? Do you have any areas in the state of Georgia where you hope to direct funds? The State Housing Trust Funds direct funds across the state. Our job is to ensure that all communities in Georgia have access to this funding. So we don't have a direct area where we hope to direct funds with. We are open to projects throughout the state, and we want to fund projects throughout the state. I'm going to go back to the slide on what we have available this second round for funding. Give me 1 second, Pax.
Thank you. Apologies.
So this,
I clicked on the wrong link, but thank you.
You're welcome. And this is the available funding that we have for the second round of funding currently. Ms. Deborah.
Thank you. As I was glancing through cycle 1, I didn't notice, is there a limit in the categories that one entity can apply for?
So it is one project for one fund source of funding when you are applying. So you can't use the same project for every funding source. It would have to be a different project.
And we have to outline those separate projects in this one pre-application.
You can identify your what you plan to apply for in your pre-application. So if you are doing different projects for the pre-application process, you're going to have to submit a pre-application for those different projects.
Okay, because the reason I'm concerned is we've already submitted application for the ESG and the HOPWA. So would we have to include that information in this pre-application that we've done that?
So ESG and HOPWA are separate of the State Housing Trust Fund. So we wouldn't need to see that information for ESG or HOPWA because those are federally funded programs. All of with the exception of Home ARP under Georgia Rehoused, these are all state funded projects with the exception of Home ARP.
Okay, thank you, because I noticed it mentioned ESG in the cycle 1 information. So that's why I was concerned. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Kia or Ms. Burns?
Hi, it's Shay, like Shea Stadium, Shea Butter.
Okay.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay,
Yes.
so I think my question is regarding the different projects for the various initiatives underneath each section. So each project has to have its own project, but would it be possible to cross over organizations, partners into each one of those funding cycles? Does that question make sense?
Are you saying that you will have maybe the same community partners in each project? Is that what you're asking?
Not every project, but some of the projects may overlap. So especially for like supportive services or organizations that provide certain services may potentially cross over for the big initiative that we're putting together under each funding source.
No, we will look at that, and we will see that to us that is community partnership, and that's what we want to see is that there is some
Got it.
community partnership going on.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Pax, would you consider funding to a local VA housing initiative and or the city housing authority? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that question for me, please?
Sure. So your preferred applicant would be a city entity potentially partnering with a nonprofit. Would it be appropriate for the funds that you are trying to put into our areas to address homelessness for it to go to our city's housing authority or our VA homeless housing initiatives?
So the primary applicant could be one of those organizations, but the co-applicant on there also needs to be your local government. So we need to see that the local government is also invested and involved in the project.
Right, so the housing authority would, it's a subset of city government, so that they would be a prime, but, okay, I got it, very clear. But those would be A-okay.
Yes, if they meet the requirements of the notices once they go out, then yes, or they meet the eligibility requirements of the pre-application.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Larry?
So I'm looking for the non-congregate shelter or transitional housing opportunities. Which one of the notices would that be included in? I don't
That's
see
gonna
one separate
be
for that one.
that's gonna be under your acute homeless response grant for capital projects. It should be named Georgia Rehouse Acute Homeless Response Grant for Capital Projects.
So is that one only allowed for capital projects, or can that be regular programming?
That's gonna be more, if you're saying regular programming as far as like supportive services, then that's gonna be the acute homeless response grant for supportive services, if you're looking for services.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Sherry, I see your question. One question. If we are interested in the residential portion of the grant, do we have to be a nonprofit? As if you have the local governments as your co-applicant on there, then you are open to the funding. What we need to see is that collaborative partnership and community partnership. So with your community partners as well. Miss Deborah?
Considering your answer earlier, I'm wondering, since our public housing authority is separate from our city governmental entity, can the public housing authority, with them demonstrating a collaborative, submit application as well as the city submitted application?
Say that one more time for me, Miss Deborah.
Our public housing authority is a separate entity from our local government.
Okay.
With that being said, is it possible for the Public Housing Authority to have their separate collaborative partnership with the city support, submitting an application, as well as our city, the city of Albany, submitting an application?
If they are for different projects, then yes.
Okay.
So if the housing authority has the local government investment and support on a project, then they can apply. If the city of Albany has a different project, and there's some community partnership happening there as well, then they could apply for another project as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, the PowerPoint will be available. We will have that up on the website, no later than tomorrow for you all, as well as this recording. I don't see any more hands up or any other questions. And hey, Joseph.
Hi, how are you?
Well,
I would like to provide a little bit of clarity around the HMIS piece. For the HMIS component of this, if you are already on the system, that's great, and you'll just show that you're on the system. If you're a new organization that's currently not on HMIS, we will not set up a grant that you haven't received the award for. So you can't try to get on the system and say, hey, I'm applying to the Rehouse grant. But if you already have existing programming and you're privately funded or you're receiving funds from your local city, then we can set up those projects on the system, but it's just not going to be set up as a rehoused grant. And I know that we've had other applicants have that question. So I just wanted to provide you that clarity that you can get on the system, but it just has to be for existing projects that you already have.
Joseph. Pax, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so that was really, really interesting. And I just want to absolutely confirm if it is a new organization and the HMIS is trying to get them in, and they want to apply as one of the program providers for this grant, but they're not in HMIS yet because they are brand new, then it seems like a catch-22. So they need to already have some kind of project going. They can't. I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't understand. I'm so sorry.
No, you're
Go
fine.
back to that
You're
slide.
fine. So the expectation is that if you are currently using HMIS, you show us proof that you currently have HMIS. If you are not currently using HMIS, the requirement is that if you are awarded, you will be required to use the system. But we want you to kind of go ahead and make that initial contact, not to get on the system, but trying to figure out who your local COC is and kind of what you need to do in the event that you are awarded funding, that you are able to get on the system if awarded funding. So the expectation is not that you are registered for HMIS at the time of application, if that makes any sense.
It sure does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We actually manage the HMIS for our COC, and it's a recent thing that we are now managing it, and we are trying to get entities on. And yes, so thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any questions in the chat. I want to make sure that I've acknowledged everyone that had their hand up. to ensure that we got your questions answered. I do want to put put the contact information here. If you guys have any questions after this, I will hang out for a bit in case individuals think of any questions that they may have. But I do want to thank each and every one of you for doing the work that you do and joining us today to learn more about Georgia Rehouse and the pre-application process. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.